Good morning and welcome to this local review body meeting of Tuesday, the 11th of January 2022. I am the convener of the local review body, Councillor Lewis Simpson, and I'm joined today by two volunteers from the Planning and Development Management Committee, Councillors Willie Wilson and Councillor Bob Braun. Thank you very much indeed for volunteering for today's meeting. I'm also joined by Mr. David Harrison, who is the planning advisor to the LRB and is not part of the planning department and has had no previous involvement in any of the applications on the agenda today, and by Mr. Colin Elliott, legal advisor to the local review body, and Mr. Williams of committee services. Colleagues, can I ask if there are any declarations of interest by members on any item on the agenda today? I have none. Councillor Wilson?
None.
Councillor Braun?
And none for me.
Right. Can we also note the minutes of the meeting of 9th November and the minutes of the meeting on the 7th of December?
Noted.
Noted, thank you. We can now move on to today's business. And the first item today, item 1, is a planning application to review condition 3 on planning consent as it's part of a change of use for a dwelling house to allow operation of a childminding business for a temporary period of 5 years at 31 Orchard Way in Stour. So Mr. Harrison, can I ask you to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, convener. The application is just as you've described, but you might like to maybe turn to page 29 and 30, which provide you with the location and site plans, and I'll take you through a number of photographs of the site in question. The general sequence of the photographs will be approaching the property from the east, then the driveway and the frontage involved after that, and then finally moving round the property to view it from the western side and the side elevation. So if I can maybe turn to the first photograph now. As I said before, this is us looking in a westerly direction, in other words approaching from the eastern side of number 31 Orchard Way, which you can see identified by the red line. And the first thing I might mention in this photograph, which you'll see in previous ones as well, is that you can see that there's a high wall of an adjoining property basically running up against the area of hard standing associated with number 31. So if we move up a little bit in the next photograph there, just to give you a little bit more of a detail of that, because I appreciate that the driveway and the extent of the drop curb is the issue before you today. You can see obviously that there is a drop curb to some extent at present, although my understanding is that the extent of the parking area associated with that has been enlarged in the past, and the applicant makes that clear in their submission. So we move on from there slightly to, as it were, to step back from it, and that gives you, shall we say, an illustration of the extent of the drop curb as it stands at the moment. But as you can see, there's a couple of sections where the drop curb rises up opposite the extended area of the driveway with the grey van in it, as it were, and that sort of, as it were, is the issue under consideration. So we move on from there in the next photograph, just to stand, shall we say, first of all, in the footpath on the frontage, looking back to where the first photographs were taken there. Again, you can see the extent of parking, the extent of the shall we say, retaining wall, or I should say the high wall associated with the adjoining property, and of course the frontage of number 31 itself. Moving on from that photograph and just going on to the opposite side of the road, just to give you a clear indication of the whole frontage there. And then moving on to the next photograph there, we step back again a little bit further, and we're now at the junction, which obviously this is a corner property. And you can see that there is no development on the opposite side of the road from the property, mainly. And then from there, if we swing slightly to the left, we see the gable of number 31 and part of its garden extending to the rear. And then again, if we swing slightly to the left from the same position, we see the adjoining property lying to the rear of number 31. So if we go to the final photograph, I'll just leave you with that because it gives you the detail of the entrance to the driveway. Turning first of all, in summary, to the applicant's case. The applicant is a self-employed childminder who has been working from home for the last 3 years without any complaints from neighbours, with the approval of the Care Inspectorate and in association with Perth and Kinross Council. She currently has a maximum of 6 children, including 2 of her own. A change of use is now involved as she wishes to accommodate a 7th child, a sibling of one of the other children. Temporary permission for 5 years is requested to enable that to happen. The intention would be to return to a fewer number of children later. Planning permission was granted recently and it has a condition requiring the extension of the access curb. The driveway was extended some 8 years ago and 4 rather than 2 cars can be parked off-road. The cost of lowering the curb to the Roads Authority specification is seen as disproportionate to the temporary nature of the planning permission and would make the accommodation of the additional child impossible. It is suggested that the condition might be varied to block off or remove the 2 additional parking spaces for the temporary period of the consent and to allow the permission to be implemented while the work was completed during the next 6 months, or as an alternative. One child has allergies and this 7th child would assist by adding stability to the setting for the parents involved who are key workers. It would be difficult and upsetting for those parents to try to find alternative provision for their children. The applicant's statement is accompanied by a personal letter from the parents involved, particularly as this gives details of their personal circumstances. It seems more appropriate to draw your attention to this what corresponds rather than seeking to summarise it. The letter can be found on page 17. Turning now to the officer's report of handling. Based on the consultation reply from Environmental Health, this business, which has been running with up to 6 children, has been operated in a way that is seen as compatible with this residential area. The increase to 7 is not seen as a significant increase and is below the level of a commercial nursery. As such, the proposal is seen as being in accordance with Local Development Plan 2 Policy 17. Consequently, no conditions relating to the timings or days of operation have been attached to the decision notice, and it is anticipated that any concerns that may arise would be responded to by Environmental Health. Regarding roads matters, it is recognised that there is some travel by car to and from the site, and some users would walk. The level of traffic is expected to be low and would not have an adverse impact on residential amenity. In terms of off-street parking, while some spaces are available, access to these is not seen as ideal and should be improved. A condition is recommended in that context. In this case, I can confirm there were no representations and there is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Colleagues, are there any questions for officers on the application for review? Councillor Braun?
No, I've got none on this one, thank you.
Councillor Wilson?
Just one quick question. Looking at the photograph we've got before us, that situation with the extended running, if I can put it that way, and a drop curb that covers something like 2/3 to 80% of the the running capacity, with ability to take 4 vehicles, that's been in existence for how long, Mr. Harrison?
Certainly a number of years. I think the applicant was suggesting it's something in the order of the driveway was extended 8 years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. That's the right photo for me as well, Mr. Harrison. So we can see the bit of curb in question here. Can I just would it be your understanding this is a relatively quiet street, given it in effect doesn't lead anywhere? It's simply apart from to the houses there. So not the only people driving by there will be people with reason to be in Orchard Way.
Oh, I think so. Yes, it is a residential street. In fact, it's quite well into the development in comparison to even other people, shall we say, in that development would access their houses without having to pass this particular property.
That seemed that way to me, but when I went to look at this site, certainly I had some difficulty finding the number. I don't know how they worked out the numbers in that street. It was up and down the street quite a bit, and I did notice both it's quite quiet, and also that seems to me in the street there's no problems with parking in the street. There seem to be quite a lot of street parking around, so it would seem to me there is no suggestion that the driveway is necessarily used by the customers, as it were, of the childminding business.
Well, certainly when I was there, as you can see in the photograph, the driveway was fully occupied by vehicles which I assume are associated with the applicants rather than people dropping off children. It was later on in the morning, so any children present will already have almost certainly been there.
Yeah, well, it certainly seemed to me there was possibly another business operating from there again without any issue. But anyway, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. So I think we can now go toward a preliminary decision. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Broad.
I'm happy to proceed, convener.
Councillor Wilson?
Happy to proceed. We have the information.
Right, as am I, colleagues. So we can assess the case and move to debate. So, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth and Kinross local development plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, I will start us off with this one. At first sight, this may appear to be quite a straightforward request, considering the condition or the removal of a condition. But the rules are clear on the number of children involved in the childminding business. However, I feel, given firstly that the extra child, as it were, is one who will be arriving the same as the other ones, or one of the other ones that's there already, and I hesitate to use the word trivial, but I think the point Councillor Wilson made, that this driveway has been in existence for some years and caused no issue. I feel that on this occasion, I am agreeing with the applicant, I think, and although I recognise that there comes a point with numbers and material change of use where the rules should apply, I think on this occasion I would be content to delete this condition and to allow this business to continue in its present arrangement. Councillor Braun, may we have your view?
Yes, thank you, convener. I'm thinking a little bit along the same lines as you. I think the planning officer has made a correct decision. I think there's no problems there with it as such, but I think you have to accept that not everything fits into a pigeonhole easily. And I think this is one of those circumstances where there is, when you look at the photograph, particularly this photograph in front of us, you can see that there's a situation where a little bit of flexibility, I think, is called for here. I have to say that looking at this photograph, if anybody driving off that driveway into the road missed the drop curb, I certainly wouldn't want to be driving with them, to be honest. There's plenty of space to come out there without any problem at all. I don't want to set a precedent, as none of us do, but I think given the circumstances, given this photograph and the view of the drop curb, I feel that whilst let's say the planning officer was correct in his original appraisal, I think in this case I'm accepting the appeal of the applicant, and I feel that condition 3 should be removed completely. So that's my decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Brown. Councillor Wilson, will we have your view?
Thanks, Convener. I agree. I think the photograph says it all in general terms. I understand the reasons for the condition being put in, because planners and technical staff need to observe a whole set of circumstances when they're preparing these reports. However, the elected members have a wee bit more leeway to have a degree of discretion, and I think we could exercise that for the following reasons. One is what we see before us is what we see, and Councillor Braun's already said that. Secondly, this is a temporary consent, and thirdly, there's a kind of humanitarian aspect to it as well that I think perhaps doesn't comply with all the technical issues, but this is somebody providing a service for key workers in a village where the other, and if I use the expression, bairns are close by, and there's a one child and a sibling to come along, and it makes sense for that group cohesion to be followed. And whilst I would normally hesitate in not having drop curbs, I think in this instance we can allow a bit of leeway and ask for the condition to be set aside and allow the review. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. So, Mr. Elliott, I think we have, starting off unusually with a unanimous decision. I think you have all the information you require. It's important to point out that we are not suggesting that the officers were being overzealous or anything on this occasion. This is one that needs to come to this body to be looked at, and for us to use a little bit of the flexibility and discretion mentioned by Councillor Braun. So, are you happy that you have everything you require, Mr. Elliott?
Convener, I think that's grant the review by removing condition 3, and of course your justification provided a little bit of detail. It's the circumstances of the case and the location of the particular issue.
Yes. May I just confirm, it's definitely for a temporary period of 5 years?
Yes, if you look at page 21, the original decision notice, it is a temporary period of 5 years.
I think that gives us further comfort. Thank you very much, Mr. Elliott. So I think the applicant will be pleased with this result, and we wish them the best of luck with both their businesses on site. So we now move on, colleagues, to the second item for today, which is item 2. And this is a planning application for the change of use from open space to form extension to garden ground, erection of garden buildings and associated works in retrospect at 8 Almond Grove, Hunting Tower Field. Mr. Elliott, may I ask you to introduce this application for review?
I'm assuming, Convener, you're wishing me to introduce it rather than Mr. Elliott.
Good point to Mr. Anderson.
That's okay, right. As you say, Convener, it's a detailed planning application for the change of use from open space to form an extension to garden ground, the erection of a garden building and associated works in retrospect at 8 Almond Grove, Hunting Tower Field. The land was part of a larger area of open space. It has been enclosed on its north and west boundaries with a high timber fence. It extends to some 190 square metres. Public footpaths serving the housing area run along both boundaries. These footpaths form a link to the Salmon Run National Cycle Route number 77, which follows the River Almond immediately to the north. That route is also a right-of-way and part of the core path network. I'll maybe take you through some photographs now, but you might like to page 63, which provides you with the location plan and site plans. The general sequence of the photographs will be, as you see here, the applicant's house and its adjoining neighbour, then the western and northern footpaths, the enclosure of the adjoining land, and then the relationship with the cycle route, and then finally internal photographs of the applicant's garden. So in the first photograph here, as I say, we have number 8, the applicant's house, clearly identified, and then its neighbour number 10, who we'll come to later, on the opposite side of that turning hammerhead. And the photographs now will take you up the footpath on the western side of the applicant's property to start off with. But even in this photograph, you might see that beyond the red line adjacent to the footpath, we see further enclosure of another property beyond. But if we progress by going up the footpath now in the next photograph, we of course have the applicant's property and the hedge on the right-hand side of your photograph there, and the applicant's garage associated shown as well. On the opposite side of the footpath, we have number 10 Almond Grove. And right in the centre at the end of the footpath, you can see where it takes a slight dog leg, a new fence which relates to a neighbour's property. So if we carry on up the footpath in that northerly direction, we can see that junction between the neighbour's fence, now the dark green as it were, actually the applicant's dark green fence on the right hand side, and then the fence beyond enclosing property associated with number 3 Almond Place, and then a remaining area of open space to the north of number 10 Almond Grove, which has not been enclosed but was part of the larger area of open space. I should maybe mention at this point that that area of grass that you're looking at has also been the subject of a separate application for enclosure as a part of the garden ground of number 10 Almond Grove. That has been declined by the authority and is now the subject of an application to the local review body, which will be held at a later date. So if we progress up the footpath from there, in the next photograph we come to the junction, as it were, between the applicant's property with the dark fence and then the more new brown fence on the adjoining property associated with number 3 Almond Place. From there, if we go to the next photograph, we see that junction more clearly, and as you can see, the footpath which approaches Almond Place starts to bend away. But this shows you the enclosure between the fence associated with number 8 and the fence relating to number 3 Almond Place. And from there, if we just step into that space a little bit in the next photograph, you can see where the fence ends, as it were, the applicant's fence ends, and other enclosures have taken place to effectively enclose the footpath on both sides as it is now. So if we move on from that and come back from that, we can see the rear of number 8 and the enclosure at that corner. And then again, if we step back again in the next photograph, we step into the cycle route, that's cycle route 77, that's standing there looking down the footpath towards the back of number 8 and number 10. And you can see the junction there between these two and the area of open space, which is the subject of a separate application and now an appeal to the local review body associated with number 10. From there, if we swing round in the next photograph to the left, if we can, this is now looking down National Cycle Route number 77 at the junction between the footpath serving the housing and that core path network. And what you may notice here, I noticed, was a mirror that has been installed opposite that junction, which seemed to illustrate that somebody has taken it upon themselves to recognise, as it were, that the high fences are providing a degree of enclosure at the junction, which people would like to be able to see round to a greater or lesser extent, to see if they can avoid a potential collision. So if we move on from there and swing round to the right, we now move into the garden ground of number 8, and they're given a general indication of the additional area that's been added to that garden ground. So in other words, where the photograph's been taken from as part of the original land associated with number 8, and then there's been some addition to that. So there'll be a sequence of photographs now swinging round towards the left, just to show you that additional ground that's been added. So if we move to the next photograph, we're still seeing the additional building that's been added, the little garden building there, but that shows you the corner of the additional area on the western side, the eastern side, I beg your pardon. And then if we, from that position, swing round to the left, we're still seeing the fence which has enclosed that additional ground and the extent of the additional ground involved as well. If we swing round again to the left in the next photograph, it'll take you back to the junction, which seems the most critical part of this particular proposal, and the adjoining fences. So I'll just leave you with that photograph. Turning now in summary to the applicant's case, the applicant purchased the additional garden ground from the Greenbelt Company in 2015 and moved the boundary fence to enclose this space some 6 years ago. This fencing was attached to the fencing of the neighbour at number 2 Almond Place, and they had also bought land from the company and extended their garden with the approval of the council as the planning authority. This created a continuous fencing on the southern side of the footpath. This did not create any kinks or blind spots of this northern footpath. The landscape planting adjacent to the western footpath on the other boundary has been retained. The garden shed has been in place for some years. At that time, and for the last 6 years, the adjacent ground to the north was open space, although it wasn't well maintained by the company. However, in 2001, that ground was sold by the Greenbelt Company to and enclosed by timber fencing by the neighbour at number 3 Almond Place. This has enclosed the previously open-sided footpath to the north. I'll turn now in summary to the officer's report of handling. Similar applications for the change of use of adjacent areas of open space to the north and the west of the site into garden ground at 3 Almond Place and 10 Almond Grove were recently refused as being contrary to policies 1A, 1B, 15, 17 and 39 of the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2. This proposal is seen as raising very similar matters. Approval has been granted for the change of use of a smaller area of open space to extend garden ground at 4 Almond Place. In that instance, consent was granted due to its limited size and the limited impact that this would have on footpaths and cycle routes. The land use issue concerns whether this amenity open space should be incorporated into the garden ground of 8 Almond Grove, or whether it should be retained as amenity land for the wider public benefit. The ground is part of the amenity open space associated with this housing estate and the wider footpath network linking onto the National Cycle Route 77, a well-used resource linking Almond Bank and Perth. While the extent of the impact is not seen as significant in itself, when taken together with the other proposals that have been refused, the high fence enclosure contributes to the hemming in and creation of blind spots on the footpaths. The restricting of visibility at the junction of the paths at the northwest corner is of particular concern, as this reduces safety for pedestrians and cyclists. Consequently, the proposal is seen as being contrary to Local Development Plan Policy 15, Public Access. It also reduces the attractiveness and usability of the footpaths and thereby erodes local distinctiveness contrary to Criteria A of Local Development Plan Policy 39, Landscape. While this proposal was refused, the officer considered that there may be scope for some of the land to become garden ground, along with the repositioning and reduction in the height of fencing fencing to provide intervisibility at the junction of the footpaths. This would need to be the subject of a revised planning application, which should include details of a new open space planning plan reflecting the Council's supplementary guidance regarding open space provision. In conclusion, the proposal is assessed as being contrary to policy 14A and 17 residential areas of the local development plan, which seek to retain public open and amenity space of amenity value. It is also seen as contrary to policy 1A placemaking, as the proposal does not contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built and natural environment, and also contrary to criteria A of policy 1B placemaking, as it is seen as eroding the existing coherent street, space and building structure of the estate. The summer house is considered to be acceptable both in terms of scale and design. In addition, while each application requires to be determined on its merits, the proposal is seen as having broader harm and, if approved, may be cited as a precedent for the enclosure of open space, resulting in the cumulative detrimental impact on visual amenity and public access. In this case, there are no representations. However, there is a request for both a site visit and a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks, Mr. Harrison, for the report. I'm on page 63, where there's a helpful plan, both of what is the proposal is in retrospect. It's always easier to see what things look like in reality, Convener, after they're done about planning. But Mr. Harrison, I'm referring to your points made about this application being part of a series of applications, I think. And I'm right in thinking that number 10, Almond Grove, has an outstanding application.
Well, it has an outstanding appeal. The application was declined by the officers in a similar way to, and for similar reasons to the one before you today, and the applicant at number 10 has submitted an appeal or a review application to LRB, which is outstanding.
Which we may see in due course. And turning back to the map now, and I'm in Almond Place. Number 3, I think, has can you just remind us about the status of an application concerning number 3 or an appeal?
Yes, the situation as I understand it there is that they also have made an application for the change of use of the, shall we say, substantial area you see on the plan to the west, as it were, to the rear of number 3, and that has been declined. It is not, as far as I'm aware, been registered as a review appeal as yet, but of course that may come forward.
Is it everything from you, Councillor Wilson?
That's me, Convener. Thank you.
Councillor Braun, have you any questions?
Yeah, just one. Just to clarify, following on from Councillor Wilson, looking at the photograph now in front of us, the brown fence on the left, that's number 3, then that application for that has been turned down as well. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, my understanding, their application to extend, and yes, it clearly would be a retrospective application in far as closure is concerned as well. Yes,
yeah, that's been refused as well.
Yes,
at the moment. Right. Okay, fine. That's fine, Convener. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Broad. Mr. Harrison, we've considered something similar to this at the last meeting, and it looks like we'll be going to Hunting Tower Field again. But I just wanted to clarify, the areas that have been fenced in this photograph, for instance, that have been fenced in by the people who have since bought the ground from Greenbelt. The ground is still public amenity open space. whether it's surrounded by a fence or not. Is that the case?
That's right. Basically the fact that the property has been sold by the Greenbelt Company, or the ground has been sold by the Greenbelt Company to adjoining proprietors, doesn't change the planning status of the land.
So thanks for that clarification. Right. So I have no further questions. So I think we can consider a preliminary decision. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. I'm content that we proceed. I think I certainly have enough information to help us make a decision.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Braun.
I too am happy to proceed, Convener.
As am I, colleagues. So we can now assess the case and move to debate. Can I ask you, Councillor Wilson, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perthing and Ross Local Development Plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off?
Thanks, Convener. Well, I have the benefit of knowing this pathway and some of the highways and the byways here, both on foot and by cycling. You'll be pleased to know, Convener, along them, and that always helps. This is a little bit more complicated than initially comes to mind with this individual application. That's why I wanted to ask Mr. Harrison about other applications. Now, if the housing developers hadn't engaged Greenbelt in the first place, we might not be here, but let's not go there. Yeah, I'll just do one line on that, Convener. But we are where we are now, and we're left to pick up the pieces. And to some degree, I've a degree of empathy about the house owners who, I think, being left with what will have been an untidy area at the back of their house, if Greenbelt had anything to do with it, wanted to do something about it. So I'm not unsympathetic to residents wanting to do something. I'm not sure we've got the correct solution here, and I'm going to propose that we don't allow the review, but I want to sound that as constructive as possible, Convener, in that I think if we don't allow this review, it will help the residents and the planners to get together again to come up with a potential solution. I think there are problems with the sight lines. I think there are problems with the height of the fence and the tunnelling effect, I think, of what is proposed. But that's my brief summary. I've got some comments that I could make on the detail of the reasons for refusal, but I'll wait and see what other colleagues say before I start to narrate any of these, Convener. And I would emphasise, I think I'm trying to look at this in as constructive a way as possible. It's not a no, never solution with me. It's not quite this solution, but can we reapply ourselves to look at other potential solutions?
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Braun, may we have your view?
Thank you, Convener. I'm following on really from Councillor Wilson on this. I think it was quite obvious when these properties were built. There was a amenity space planned in to the site for the benefit of all the people living there. But looking at the photographs we've seen, particularly this ground around, I think it was number 10. Almond Grove, you can see how the greenery has deteriorated, and when you look at the work that's been done within the boundary of number 8, obviously they've maintained the ground and brought it up to a garden standard, but nonetheless there is a detrimental effect here. So I, along with Councillor Wilson, feel that in this instance we must refuse the appeal. But I do feel that given the work that people can do and that the work this green space needs to have done to it, perhaps it might be beneficial if number 8 and number 10 Almond Grove and perhaps number 3 Almond Place were to get together and contact and speak to the planners to find some amicable solution here. which would benefit all parties, I think that would be a way forward. And I think that would be my caveat to refusing the application. I think there's room to manoeuvre here for the benefit of all. So that would be my answer. So refuse the application, but I think the parties should get together with the planners and come to a solution.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Braun. I think unanimity is broken out again with this one. I am in complete agreement with that we refuse this. There's fencing off an area is only one way of dealing with a maintenance issue. There are other ways of dealing with it. And I think, at the risk of repeating myself from the last meeting, I think that the policies and the guidance in the development plan are very important here, and we mustn't forget that one of the reasons that this development was permitted was the extensive amount of amenity space and how pleasant these open paths were to walk down to the riverside and have a look around. I too have cycled these routes regularly, and I'm more recently a pram pusher, not in this area, in another area which has the good fortune or ill fortune to be maintained by the Greenbelt Company. And there is no doubt, if all the gardens are enclosed in this manner, the paths will be less pleasant, they will be hemmed in, and there are dangers for everyone, but particularly I think for those with slightly less mobility at every junction. And it makes, as I say, what could be a pleasant walk in the countryside into a very unpleasant scurry down a dark lane. So I think we need to refuse this. We have no powers over what the Green Belt does or doesn't do and hasn't done. But I do reiterate, I think, Councillor Wilson's point that we have a degree of sympathy for the adjacent owners, because A, they have an eyesore piece of ground beside their house, and B, they may even have been misled when they purchased the ground into thinking it was then theirs to do with as they wished. So I think we need to revisit this, not just on this estate, but I think throughout Perthing and Ross, and assist both applicants and council officers in having a consistent approach to retaining as much public open space as is possible. So I think we're all in agreement that we refuse this, Mr. Elliott. So I don't know if you require any further information or if Councillor Wilson wishes to elaborate any further.
Convener, Councillor Wilson indicated that he may have changes to the grounds of refusal.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Convener, and I'm trying to read my own writing here as I've scribbled some notes when reading the papers. I'm on page 51, Mr. Elliott, and I'm on the reasons for refusal. Line 3, at the end of that line, it says due to extending the garden fence line. I wonder if we could make that extending the 2.2 metre high fence, extending the 2 metre high fence. Okay, and then going down to the second last line where it says intervisibility between path junctions and created an unoppressive or creates an oppressive corridor. I said a tunnel, but I'm happy to go with the wording here. An oppressive corridor. And in the last line there, where it says footpath links, I would like to change that to in conjunction with the fence in the north to the right way and core path. So that, Mr. Elliott, I hope that makes some sense to you, but in conjunction with the fence to the north. I don't want to narrate over all the photographs we saw, but as we saw them, there's a link with the fence at the north side. Could I go on to reason 2?
Yes, Councillor Wilson, I noted that down, but I'll summarise all the changes at the end.
Okay, and by adding after the words spaces and buildings, by introducing built development on an area of amenity open space. By introducing built development on an area of amenity open space, and that's an addition to that third line. And then finally, and reason number 3, second line, the corridor effect in conjunction with, and that's where my writings let me down a wee bit, but in conjunction with the fence to the north, along the footpath with kinks and blind spots. Right? And on line 3, there is, to put in wording, there is severely limited intervisibility. That's a quiz question for next week, I think, convener. There is severely limited intervisibility on line 3, and the cyclists, line 4, will reduce the safety of pedestrian cyclists using the path network. That's and then in the very last line, if we take out, I think it would make more grammatical sense if we took out the core path right away and simply said integrity of well-used cycle and pedestrian routes. And colleagues, you'll be relieved to know that I'm okay with reasons 4 and 5 over the page. Thank you.
Convener, just to summarise for members' benefit, on the very last point, yes, Councillor Wilson's correct in that the integrity of the core path right away and well-used routes. This particular location is not a core path right away. It leads up to a core path right away, but it's not the actual core path right away. So that deletion I can understand. But just to recap, members, on ground number 1, third line is extending the changes to the extending the 2-metre high fence line. Second last line into the last line, it will become junctions and crates and oppressive corridor footpath in conjunction with the fence to the north to the right of way and core path network. And ground 2, what I have written down is at the end, adding in the reason for the refusal, it's going to be spaces and buildings by introducing built development on an area of amenity open space. And then ground 3, second line, it's where fence line creates a corridor effect in conjunction with the fence to the north. Next line down, but it says there is no intervisibility, that changes to there is severely limited intervisibility. Line below that, where it's got safety pedestrian cyclists using the path network, so the grammar's corrected there. And then the last change, consequently the proposal has an adverse impact upon the integrity of the well-used routes. And there are no changes suggested to grounds 4 and 5.
Thank you, President. Could I just get some further clarification? If just when you mentioned the removal of the core path and right of way, what is the status of these paths? Because it did occur to me when I was there the other day that possibly the next thing would be the paths being closed off, given the amenity spaces being closed off. So what is actually the status of the paths?
Well, convener, in path terms, of course we're beyond debate now, decisions been taken. But in path terms, and path terms can have status as sort of rights of way core paths, and there are certain provisions and protections there. The core path and the path that is both a core path and right of way is the one that runs along the river.
Yeah.
The path that we're looking at here specifically that you have the photograph of is a path within the development, but its uses as a path.
Right.
So if there was any attempt to block that off, then the planning use would be changing at that point.
I see. Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Thanks. Just when I saw that getting
Yeah.
removed, it occurred to me. Thank you. Well, that's that one, and agreed. Once again, this will not be the answer the applicant was seeking, but I hope, given this decision and the comments that we've made, this will assist all residents in this development and others to consider how best to go about dealing with this sort of bits, pieces of open space and similar issues. I think, colleagues, now would be an appropriate time to have a short break, and then we can return refreshed and raring to go. I would suggest at 11:30, colleagues. That's okay. We can see you all back here at 11:30. Okay.
Thank you, convener.
Thank you. So that's 11:30. We're all back and ready to go. Catch you all with a mouthful of biscuit. We'll move on now to consider item 3, which is a planning application for the erection of a garage stroke workshop stroke garden machinery store at Craigend House, Pow Mill. Mr. Harrison, may I ask you to introduce this application for review?
Thank you, Convener. As you say, it's a detailed planning application for the erection of a garage and workshop at Craigend by Pow Mill. The applicant's property extends to some 2 acres, with the majority elevated above the adjoining public road. This is occupied by a house and a number of ancillary buildings, some existing and some proposed and under construction. The proposed building would be sited at the lowest corner of the grounds and would be served by its own access and circulation space. It would provide some 45 square metres of workshop accommodation, served by 3 sets of double doors, and that's at the ground floor level. The first floor level is identified as storage, welfare, restroom facilities. It is formed by a combination of a box dormer and a pitched roof wallhead dormers on the southern elevation and a pair of pitched roof dormers on the opposite elevation. The proposed structure measures some 9.4 metres in width and 5.4 metres in depth, with an overall footprint of 51 square metres. Upper level accommodation would be served by an external staircase, and a link bridge would serve from that to the upper garden area of the property. The building would be clad in horizontal timber, with the exception of the double doors, which would be clad vertically. The roof would be clad in natural slate. And I'll just take you through some photographs now, but obviously you'll be aware from the papers that the applicant's agent has put in extensive photographs as well, and he was fortunate to get a better day as far as the weather was concerned for taking the photographs, so I would draw your attention to that. But you might like to have page 132 to hand, which will provide you with location and site plans and drawings of the proposed building. As you see in the first photograph, the general sequence will be approaching the site looking in a westerly direction, in other words, coming in from the eastern side, the garage site as seen from the west, then the house and the ancillary buildings at the upper level, and then the garage site and the lower garden ground level. So as I say, in this first photograph, we're looking at Craigend, which you can see is slightly elevated above the surrounding ground here. And this is approaching us travelling in a westerly direction. And you can see from the red line, the grounds are extensive and they're generally surrounded by agricultural land. So if we go from that position, we go up the road, round the corner as it were, and looking back in the opposite direction now. This is now looking east. We're catching the corner and the lower level of the applicant's property there. as seen from the public road. And where you see the car park, that's where the access into that lower level takes place. The applicant, of course, has a separate access to reach the higher level at the other side of the grounds of the application site. So from that position on the public road, if we move slightly towards the left, we see more of the area which would be occupied by the circulation space for the proposed garage and workshop, and the position of that identified. And despite the rather poor visibility, you can make out both the house and some of the ancillary buildings, including one of the other garages at the more elevated position as seen from the public road. So from there, if we move on, we go into the application site, and this is as it were looking down the driveway towards the public road. You might just be able to make out the gate entrance into the main part of the applications, the property that is in that photograph there, and obviously the remains of one of the original buildings within this site, but also one of basically the existing garage as it stands at the moment. Moving on from that and swinging round to the right, and there'll be a sequence of photographs to the right. We're just catching the corner of the garage I mentioned there, but now we see the driveway is swung round to the front of the house. This is the east elevation of Craigend. And if we move to the next photograph, swing round again slightly to the right, we now look at the side of Craigend, and we see some of the other facilities, such as the barbecue enclosure beyond, and then we see some of the surrounding woodland, say to the northern side of the application site. And you can see some of the materials involved in the construction of the second garage there in that corner. So if we swing right to the right-hand side in the next photograph, we see the position of that proposed garage, which is, let's say, very early stages of construction here. And what you maybe also notice in this photograph is the use of gabions to support the land being, should we say, built up as part of engineering works which have been undertaken. You'll see more of this in the past. And just to be clear, those engineering works have been the subject and approval for planning permission. Moving on from that, we go into the garden ground and go beyond that. This is us looking back, as it were, towards the proposed garage site and just catching the corner of Craigend itself. And then from that position, if we swing round slightly to the left, we catch the barbecue enclosure you saw in an earlier photograph. And then as we move on from that, in the next photograph, we see the barbecue enclosure as well, but we're stepping back a little bit. And you can see there's further engineering works in relation to creating a pond, which I say is identified on the plans. So from that position, if we move slightly to the right, we still catch the corner of the barbecue enclosure, but we're now seeing that western elevation of Craigend itself. And again, just to follow round, swinging again to the right, we get the whole of that west elevation of the property. And this is us, just to be clear, standing on the more elevated level of the application site in total. And then if we swing round again to the right of that, we're still catching the corner of Craigend, but we're seeing some of the other ancillary buildings. So here we have the existing garage and also an outbuilding providing a covered area for a hot tub. From there again, if we swing towards the right, still standing in that elevated position, we're starting now to look down onto that lower area, which will be the circulation space for the proposed workshop and accommodation. And again, if we swing slightly to the right of that photograph, we're looking down into that covered area, an indication of the garage workshop position, and as you can see, the entry where the car is parked into that general lower area. From there, we move on If we can, the next photograph, and we're coming down, so you've got some photographs from the lower level. So this is us looking up obviously to the gable of Craig End and the back of the garage from that lower level. And we swing round to the left of that. We're just getting a little bit of Craig End still, but we're starting to see the difference in levels, if I can put it that way, between the lower level, and you can see the rock outcrop illustrating that, and the gabions which have been installed on a similar level to, shall we say, provide a means of retaining the upper level relative to the lower level. So if we swing round to the left of that photograph, we look down quite clearly to the garage workshop position, and you can see the supporting gabions behind that. And clearly there's been a certain amount of groundworks taking place here to provide a level area and a certain amount of hardcore put down. And then from there, if we swing round, continue round to the left, we look up the public road and the frontage of that lowered area. So from there, if we step down into the lowered area itself, in the next photograph, you can see the difference in levels and the rock outcrop, illustrating that between the lower and the upper levels. And then swing round to the left of that photograph, we're looking straight across to part of the rock face, as it were, but also the engineering operation that's taken place with the installation of the gabions. So there, if we move on from that photograph, we step out of the application site, and this is looking from next to the public road towards the engineering groundworks that have taken place, and then swing round to the right of that photograph, and stepping back a little bit right into the public road, we get a broader view of that. Unfortunately, some of the trees have been lost in the recent gales, so there is a slight difference between the degree of enclosure that you'll see in some of the earlier photographs submitted by the applicant and this photograph. You can probably see there's a certain amount of ground disturbance from them having to be dealt with. Swinging towards the right of that photograph, we see the position of the garage and Craig End itself, as seen from the public road. And then if you move to the next photograph, I beg your pardon, that is the last photograph. So turning in summary to the applicant's case, I've focused the summary on the review statement, but of course there is a planning statement and photographs submitted as well, and I would just simply draw your attention to that. This is the second application for the proposal. It is considered that the officer has not understood the characteristics of the site, has not visited the site, and has relied on out-of-date street view images despite comprehensive photographic and landscape visual appraisals being submitted. It is considered that this information demonstrates that the proposal is appropriately sited and would not cause visual harm to the landscape or diminish the placemaking qualities of the locality. The building would be positioned in the lowest lying part of the garden. It is needed to accommodate the machinery and materials for an employee undertaking the maintenance of the grounds. The existing and proposed garaging, already approved, is required for housing the applicant's cars under cover. In assessing the council's placemaking policies, it is considered that the buildings in the upper area, as suggested by the planning officer, would be more intrusive in the landscape. It would also appear cramped as an addition to the existing and approved buildings and the approved house extensions. These buildings do not form a nucleated cluster, but are scattered within the overall property. The proposal site is screened by existing landform and trees, avoids the skyline, and would be adjacent to the existing seating and fire pit. While set in woodland, further landscaping is envisaged for this area in addition to the retaining walls which have been installed. The building is seen as being sympathetic in terms of its form, scale, design and materials. As such, the proposal is consistent with the Council's placemaking policy 1A and 1B. The proposed and broadly accords with the thrust of other local development plan policies, for example, in relation to sustainability. In this case, there are no objections to the proposal from either third parties or consultees. Turning to the officer's report of handling in summary, Craigend House is served by an existing triple garage with accommodation above, and a second triple garage is under construction. This proposal concerns a third triple garage oblique workshop with storage accommodation above. While ancillary domestic buildings are generally acceptable, consideration needs to be given to specific details and potential impact of such development on the surrounding environment. Perth and Kinross's placemaking guidance of 2020 indicates that outbuildings and garages should be subordinate to the original building and should not obscure the approach to the house, should be set back from the frontage, and be built with materials which respect the house and its surroundings. The existing ancillary buildings are sited on the larger upper area of the plot. In contrast, the proposed siting is set some 4.5 metres down at a lower level by the roadside. It is recognised that the landform and trees obscure the site from being viewed in a wider landscape context, and the proposal is seen as complying with Local Development Plan Policy 39. The officer's main concern is that the proposed ancillary building is seen as being dissociated from the house and its other ancillary buildings. This is evidenced by a combination of the marked difference in levels, the rock face separating the upper and lower areas of the garden, the need for the bridging link from the building to the upper garden level, and the introduction of a building to this lower roadside position away from the other buildings. In conclusion, the proposal is considered to be contrary to Local Development Plan Placemaking Policy 1A in that it would not contribute positively to the surrounding built and natural environment by respecting the siting, character and amenity of the place. The proposal occupies the same footprint as the previous proposal that was also refused permission. In this case, I can confirm that there are no representations. There is a request for a site visit, but no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Are there any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Convener. Just really one question. It's to do with the road, the A977. Is that a busy road that runs in front of the property, or is it?
I think that there's maybe a slight difficulty in interpreting the plan as far as that's concerned. To be clear, the A road that you're referring to is not the public road we've been looking at in these photographs.
Right.
This is a minor, almost, I shouldn't say single track, but almost single lane road which loops round from that A-class road that you've referred to there.
I thought it looked a bit narrow for an A road.
Yes, no, it quite clearly is not an A road.
Okay,
and
fine.
It's very, very, very lightly trafficked.
That clarifies that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Wilson, have you any questions for officers?
Thanks, Convener. Mr. Harrison, again, thanks for your summary presentation. I'm trying to get my head around the detailed functionality of what's proposed, because it's described as a garage oblique workshop, but looking at the plans, and we've got quite extensive information on these, it would appear to be a almost two-storey building with dormers and an upper floor. The case has been made in the papers by the applicant that the gardening's got beyond the the ken of the occupants and the gardener is employed, and the gardener needs somewhere to store his tools. But my impression is if you employ a gardener, often they bring their own tools. Now, that's a detailed question, but I just wonder if you have any information on where the balance of workshop, storage and garage lies with this proposed development, given that we've got already 6 garage spaces either available or under construction on the site already.
Well, first of all, maybe just to talk about the existing garage and proposed garage provision. You probably noticed in one of the photographs that there were a number of cars parked there, and it's fairly clear that the applicant personally has an interest in cars, and that may explain largely why he's seeking and has obtained consent for additional garage accommodation over the existing garage accommodation. My understanding, just simply from the papers, is that this accommodation that's proposed here is solely to provide for the maintenance requirements of his 2-acre house plot, which is of course quite extensive. But as you rightly point out, the building itself is a substantial building, even allowing for the fact that there is a certain amount of maintenance going to be required over the area. But what I did notice was that the accommodation, particularly at the upper level, including the substantial dormer, provides fairly extensive floor space with full headroom. It seems to be, shall we say, generous for the provision for somebody coming to maintain the grounds, but that's maybe at the discretion of the applicant. But it did seem that it was a generous provision for machinery and restroom type accommodation. But what I would notice is that there's no suggestion that there's, shall we say, provision of things like toilet facilities or the like within the plans as we see them.
Thanks for that extra explanation. I'm grateful.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Would it be possible to go back to the photograph of the existing garage, if possible? That's the one. Can you give us an indication of how the proposed building would look in relation to this? Is it a similar sort of building?
It is similar, although you'll notice first of all that these have open bays for the cars to go in, whereas the other, presumably for security purposes, have fixed doors. That's the first and most obvious thing as far as the ground floor is concerned. As far as the upper level is concerned, yes, there are 2 similar dormers proposed on one elevation, shall we say the elevation towards the garden of the applicant's property, which has 2 small dormers in it. On the opposite elevation, it is quite different in that there is a combination of a pitched roof dormer and, of course, a much more extensive flat roof dormer, which effectively has the opposite elevation, that's the roadside elevation, effectively largely as a 2-storey, much more sort of flat roofed building overall.
Right, and given, I mean, we have had issues with ancillary accommodation in the past after a number of years. Is there facilities within the existing garage for toilets and hand washing and such like?
I'm simply I don't know the answer to that question.
But we do know that there is no proposal for that in this proposed building we're considering today.
There's certainly not. The plans don't show that. I'm always aware, nothing to do with this particular proposal, that internal works within an existing building, once it's erected, are effectively exempt from involving planning permission.
Yeah.
They may require a building warrant, of course, but it's not something that would necessarily come before you.
Well, that's enough of my questions asking you to speculate, Mr. Harrison. Could we go back now to the photograph of your car parked at the roadside? I think it's possibly the one just before this, I think. I think it was the one. Oh, so that's the one. Now, I note, just following on from Councillor Braun's point with A977, I think it was rather misleading of Studio K on page 132 to clearly show the road as the A977. When I was planning my site visit, I found it extremely difficult to work out where Craig End House actually was. Not only is Scotland full of Craig Ends and Craig End houses, but this house is not an A977, despite the fact it shows it quite clearly to me that it is on there. But I did find it eventually, and funnily I've parked in exactly the same spot as you, Mr. Harrison. Obviously, Storm Arwen has taken its toll, and this site will not be as screened as it would have been when it's been proposed. Am I right in thinking that? A lot of trees and screening have been lost to the storm.
Well, yes, there's some trees immediately to the left of the photograph that we're talking about here, where yes, they have been lost. So it has opened that up to some extent. But as you'll see, that the landform is such that where you're standing on the road here, the road dips down, as it were,
Yeah.
at that particular point. But if I may draw, just as we're talking about the details of this now, just an additional matter, just to avoid any confusion. If you turn to page 133, which gives you the elevations of the building, just to be clear, what is described as the northwest elevation and the southeast elevation, you should maybe transpose those. Just to be clear, the top elevation you see in that's identified as the northwest elevation is the one that faces towards the road.
Right.
So they should be the other way around. Just to be clear, that's all.
I see what you mean, and just to be so that there will be now, you might say there's fairly limited screening, so you want this building will be very obvious as you drive down the road. Certainly in this direction.
Well,
there's limited screening, would you say?
There is limited screening in the sense that, well, first of all, it's the land that would provide the screen in between, as far as I understand it, is out with the applicant's ownership and control, and that's where the trees have come down. The applicant, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is indicating that they have some intentions of carrying out further landscaping in addition to the trees you see in the photograph.
Yeah, and am I right in thinking that transport planning colleagues have no issues with this additional entrance to the property?
No, as far as I'm aware, they have no concerns about that. As I mentioned, despite the corner that you can see in the photograph here, it is a particularly, shall we say, lightly trafficked road, in the sense that it's basically a loop. So anybody travelling towards Pow Mill from would travel on the main road. It would really only be very local traffic that would be on this particular road. I
certainly never saw another vehicle on my visit, certainly, in the whole way round.
No, likewise.
So, well, thank you, Mr. Harrison. So I think we can now move to a preliminary decision. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Braun.
Happy to proceed, Convener.
Councillor Wilson.
We have plenty of information, happy to proceed.
Yes, and I too am happy to proceed. So we can now assess the case and move to debate. I can ask you, Councillor Braun, having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, to start us off.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I've read through the paperwork, obviously. We have here a property which is a substantial property, isolated. There's no other properties around it. And as we've heard, it fronts onto a road which is a minor road with very little traffic. And obviously this is land owned by the applicant. They want to build on their land. That's a consideration. But the overall guidance here, and this guidance we have, is the supplementary guidance for placemaking. And really and truly, it's a question of is there grounds to override that guidance to approve this? My concern is the level. It was two things really. Firstly, the main thing is the fact that this building is going to be on a much lower level than the main house and other outbuildings. There's also the concern that the outbuilding will be in the front of the house, which is something that our guidance suggests should not be. But the main concern here is the fact that it's on a much lower level. And that is really, I think, the deciding factor for me. And in this instance, given that, I don't feel that there is enough grounds to overturn that supplementary guidance in this instance. If it was on the same level, even though it was in the front of the house, perhaps that would be more of an argument. But I think the fact that it's some 4.5 meters below, I think really changes the whole thing. And I am inclined on this occasion to go with the refusal and accept the officer's decision. I think, given my reasoning, there may need to be a slight change in the wording of the refusal, but I'm going to leave that till my colleagues have had their chance to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for your view, Councillor Braun. Councillor Wilson, may we have your view?
Thanks, Convener, and we've certainly plenty of information here, and the applicant's been very fulsome in giving us a lot of detail. I agree with Councillor Braun's analysis about the location and being in front of the main elevation of the main house, although there's a lot of development on this site, Convener, as we would see both from the photographs and the information before us. I have an additional problem with the proposal in relation to its scale, size and massing. If it's to be a garden store, a garage and maintenance store. I don't know quite where the applicants are heading with this, because the case is made in the paperwork for it to be a base for the gardener, presumably for mowers and other equipment. And then we see clearly on page 133 there's space for 3 cars, but not apparently in a workshop, but not an awful lot of space for storage of equipment. Now, a lot of equipment that you would need in a garden this size, 2 acres, would be fairly heavy stuff that you couldn't readily carry up and down the stairs. There might be small items that you could use in that attic storage area. I feel that the building's oversized for what is proposed, but we have what we have before us, and I quite bluntly think that the garden storage aspect of it could be covered by a substantial sturdy wooden shed, but that's not what we've got before us, Convener, before you tell me that. What we've got before us is a different sort of building, but in looking at refusal, I think the size, scale and massing of this building is incongruous in its proposed position. Now, it may be that Councillor Braun doesn't want to enter into that particular debate in his summary, but I'll leave it at that at the moment. But I certainly support the sustaining the planner's view in this one.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wilson. There seems to be unanimity so far, perhaps with perhaps a little bit of tightening up of detail. On this occasion, I too am inclined to agree with you both. I have to say that I find the murky world of ancillary accommodation to be a very difficult one for us to deal with. And I'm aware, as Councillor Wilson alluded, that we are looking at this proposal and not the other buildings on the site. But I have to say that were this the only ancillary building, I would be looking at this very differently. But I think the points that Councillor Braun make are very good. It's at the front. It's at a very low level. It seems to me to be quite disconnected, not only from the main house, but from the other buildings of various sorts. And I felt that perhaps consideration should also be given to the additional entrance, because there's already a fairly substantial entrance, which I would have thought would have been sufficient. But we don't want to stray into offering advice on other aspects of this extensive site. But as regards this one, I do have a real issue with this, the degree of ancillary accommodation, and I think, although we can discuss this shortly, I would agree with Councillor Wilson. I think given the other buildings around the site, I think it is disproportionately large for the proclaimed purpose. So I think we are all agreed to uphold, but I think we need perhaps to hear Councillor Braun first on any changes he might want to make to the wording on page 130. Councillor Braun.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, it was really very simple, really, because I think there's only one condition, one reason for refusal, and in the first paragraph, I think I would just change the second sentence to come more into line with what my thoughts were, and that would be, second sentence would read, the property would be dissociated with Craig End House and outbuildings as they sit on a higher level. I think it would keep it simple as that. I think it's more straightforward and more concise wording for that second sentence, and I also think, just as a matter of correction, it on the second paragraph it should be placemaking supplementary guidance, not guide, and as common usage we bracket the dates, but that's been pedantic. But that would be my changes. I'll subject that to Mr. Elliott's thoughts.
Right. Well, thank you, Councillor Wilson. Before we hear before we hear from Mr. Elliott, perhaps Councillor Wilson, I think that I agreed with you about the proportions here. Would it be possible to insert a comment about that as well?
Convener, if I come in,
yeah.
I think you take it step by step.
Yeah.
First of all, what Councillor Braun has proposed is refusal and changed wording. The proposal by virtue of its introduction of built development into the, may I suggest, lower rather than lowered?
Yeah.
No, yes, yes.
Roadside location has an inappropriate siting. Now, my understanding, Councillor Braun, is you take out the second sentence entirely.
Mm-hmm.
And if I heard right, I'm not sure about one word, the proposal would be, I think, another for it would be have to be disassociated with Craig End House and its outbuildings as they sit on a higher level.
That's correct. I mispronounced it. Yep.
And then technical changes to paragraph 2. Person could also placemaking supplementary guidance, not guide, yes. Supplementary guidance.
Correct.
And yes, you're right. I know it may seem pedantic, but the correct reference is Perth and Cross Local Development Plan 2 in brackets 2019. So I think I have those changes. But councillors, if I could make comment about the size of the property, and I think you have an issue there in the sense of your judging the needs or perceived needs of the applicant, and you have to be careful in that. What you have to look at is the actual size, design of the building within the siting of the location itself, and that may be a particular issue. You're not really assessing, you have to be careful about assessing the applicant's need for the property, or the proposal I should say. So I'm a bit careful on that. It would be possible to consider refusal on the basis that it's the design and scale is inappropriate for its location. But whether you need that when you've got the disassociation aspect already anyway.
Yeah, I think having heard that, Mr. Elliott, I think we probably have sufficient grounds to go with Councillor Braun's suggestion, but perhaps we should hear from Councillor Wilson.
I don't want to break unanimity, but I do think, Convener, that, and I understand Mr. Elliott's point about questioning the functionality, if you like. In many ways, I wasn't doing that. I was accepting that a 2-acre site requires equipment for for maintenance. It's rather the scale and size of the building in proportion to the demand. To have a two-story building with dormer windows is I think stretching it a bit as a garage, workshop and store for garden equipment, and I'd be quite candid about it. And I would with due respect, convener, be happy to see an additional reason for refusal that along the narration that Mr. Elliott gave us just a few moments ago.
Right then, so thank you, Councillor Wilson. So I think, Mr. Elliott, we're in a position now where we need to see if Councillor Braun agrees with that.
Yeah.
I would be inclined to keep it very simple, but I accept if you both want to proceed with that route, then I'm happy to follow on. But I do feel we've got enough grounds to refuse it as it is. But again, if it's a majority decision to put another refusal ground in there, then fine.
Right. Well, I think can you perhaps go over that final part, Mr. Harrison? We'll have that. We'll include that, I think.
Sorry.
On you go, Colin.
I think members, what may help is if an additional ground of refusal is articulated, then you can make a decision from there. Excuse me. I would point out that normally, as members will be familiar, that you are quite clear on the grounds of refusal. You're actually in slight disagreement at the moment. Two are going for refusal on certain grounds and one on refusal on just the one ground. And it's good to tease this out. But what I think, members, will draw your attention to, this is not within a settlement, so it's not the residential amenity policy. I think you're really looking at the placemaking policies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think you would be saying, if you go this direction, it'd be contrary to Perth and Carroll, the proposal contrary to Perth and Carroll's Local Development Plan 2, 2019, as the contrary to Perth and Carroll's Local Development Plan 2, 2019, as the proposal by virtue of its size and scale would be incongruous as a garage workshop within the Congress as a garage workshop and would not contribute positively to the surrounding built-in natural environment.
Right. So, Mr. Harrison, have you anything further to contribute there?
Sorry, Camilla, just to wrap up, I should get that back because I missed something out there. Yeah. I think it'd be contrary to Perth and Carroll's Local Development Plan 2, 2019, policies 1A and 1BC. Yeah, should narrate that, which is placemaking, as the proposal by virtue of its size and scale would be incongruous as a garage workshop and would not contribute positively to the surrounding built-in natural environment. I think that therefore, member, would be the additional ground of refusal if you agree with that. Right.
So, Mr. Harrison, are you happy with that?
I'm just similarly looking at the policy 1B Part C that Mr. Elliott just referred to, and the subdivisions in that refers to terms of appearance, height, scale, massing, materials, finishes and colours. And if I've picked up your discussions correctly, within that, the scale and massing might be the two words that you might want to use. I'm not meaning to correct you, Mr. Elliott, but size and scale are maybe similar things. And
yeah, no,
as it actually specifically says, scale and massing. They might
the better phraseology would be scale and massing rather than size and scale.
Yeah, that's the only comment I'd make.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. So I think if we do go back to Councillor Wilson, would you be content with that?
Yes.
Right, and Councillor Braun?
I'm happy to concur. Yeah, the two of you. Yeah, that's fine. I'm not
as am I. So I think we're still unanimous.
Yes,
Mr. Elliott, with that additional piece of advice. Thank Thank you. So that's, again, I recognise that will not be the answer the applicant was seeking, but I think we've given a very thorough review, and we look forward to seeing what else happens on that site. So thank you, colleagues. We'll move on to the last item for today's business, which is item 4, and it's an application to modify condition 5, hours of delivery at 92 Athol Road, Pitlochry. So may I ask you to introduce this application for review, Mr. Harrison?
Thank you, Convener. As you say, the appeal is seeking a modification of condition 5 of a detailed planning application regarding the hours of delivery attached to planning permission reference 12/00823, and that's a detailed application at 92 Athol Road, Pitlochry. And just to be clear, condition 5 states, and I quote, "Servicing of and deliveries to the premises shall be carried out between 0700 hours and 1900 hours Monday to Saturday only, with no servicing or deliveries permitted on Sundays." And the reason for the condition is in order to safeguard the residential amenity of the area. The applicant sought a modification to allow deliveries to take place Monday to Saturdays from 1300 hours to 2100 hours, and that Sunday deliveries are permitted during the hours of 1300 to 2100 hours. The application site lies in the centre of Pitlochry Conservation Area and forms one of the ground floor shops of a terrace which has residential accommodation on 2 levels above. The complete terrace is a Category B listed building, and I'll maybe just take you through the photographs now to illustrate that. So the general sequence of the photographs are the terrace, the shop front, and then the parking and complete servicing bay. But you might like to have page 188 before it gives you location plan and site plans. So in the first photograph here, you see the broad terrace, as it were, with the 2 levels of accommodation above the shops on the ground floor. And as you can see, the Greg's shop is one of that array, which also has this canopy over it, covering the pavement. But in this, as you can see, there is parking immediately in front of it, and you might even be able to make out the reference to the loading bay slightly uphill, as it were, from the Greg's shop itself, marked say on the highway. So if we move from there to the next photograph, we just see, shall we say, a photograph taken from the opposite side of the road. That's the Fisher's Hotel side of the road, looking directly across at the frontage of Greg's. And then if we move to the next photograph, just gives you a little bit more detail of the shall we say, the pavement in front of all that row of shops, the canopy, but also the presence of this parking oblique loading area, with of course at the opposite end from the loading bay we have a reservation for disabled parking. So if we move to the next photograph, we see in slightly more detail the actual Greg's frontage itself, and of course the original application involved proposals for alteration to the shop frontage, although it's just the condition you have before you today. But you can see the access to the flats above immediately to the left-hand side of that frontage. Moving on from that, in the next photograph, we go to the opposite side, and you can see there's a door on the opposite side as well. Just to be clear, that door doesn't serve the residential properties above. It's been blanked off, and it actually goes into the interior of the Greg's shop itself. But I say it has no purpose at all, just to be clear about that. So if we move to the next photograph, I'll just leave you with that, showing you the frontage of the terrace building. Turning now in summary to the applicant's case. In July 2021, the servicing of this bakery shop changed to between 2 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the morning. This was in response to the nationally recognised shortage of delivery drivers. This change led to complaints of disturbance during the early hours from nearby residential flats. It is anticipated that this was not in accordance, it is appreciated that this is not in accordance with condition 5 of the original planning permission, but was precipitated by the change of circumstances. In discussion with the Council's enforcement officer, it was understood that delivery times between 7 o'clock in the morning and 2100 hours in the evening on Mondays to Saturdays would be acceptable to the Council. Condition 5 in the subsequent planning consent has provided for deliveries between 7 in the morning and 1900 hours, in other words, 7 o'clock in the evening. The shop trades 7 days a week and has limited storage space. A double delivery on Saturday cannot be accommodated without causing space issues for staff, potentially blocking fire exits and raising health and food safety matters. Sundays and Monday mornings are busy times for the shop for selling sandwiches and fresh cakes, which would not be available without a delivery on the Sunday. It is considered that the complaints relate to the time when deliveries were made at night. It is requested that the exclusion of Sundays within condition 5 be removed to allow for the servicing of this bakery shop to enable it to trade on 7 days per week and have continuous servicing that it requires. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling. Ancillary food sales and seating are accepted as falling within the same class 1 for shops. Therefore, a change of use was not involved in the proposal. Potential competition with other local businesses was not considered to be a material planning consideration. However, it was recognised that there is potential for noise and odour disturbance to residents, and perhaps even vibration from the proposed condenser units. However, given the location and likely background noises and the relatively high during daytime hours, there was not considered to be an overall problem in delivering to the shop. However, there is no objection to the proposal subject to conditions controlling ventilation, noise, vibration and delivery times, and the operating hours to avoid a detrimental impact on the residential amenity of the area, and in particular the amenity of the properties above. It was noted that the proposal was considered to be acceptable regarding the potential impact on the listed building and the conservation area. In this case, there is no request for a site visit. However, there is a request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Harrison. Can I ask you, colleagues, are there any questions for officers on this application for review? Councillor Wilson.
No questions.
Thank you. Councillor Braun.
Nothing from me on this one.
Thank you. Mr. Harrison, you nearly answered my question, but I just maybe for absolute clarification, if we look at the map on 188, I recall being in this shop quite a lot in the past when it was a post office. I take it the buildings at the back shown on the map on page 188 are not connected with this building at all?
No, if you've I assume you're talking about the buildings in Mill Lane.
Yeah, the one shown as PO, that's the extent of the Greg's ownership.
That's correct, yes. It used to be a former post office, yes.
Yeah, and I take it that also then if people were minded to bring deliveries in the back, that would not be possible.
Well, if
there's no back entrance, should I say?
Yes, I was going to say I have actually gone round the lane at the back there, which serves the old mill, which you might be familiar with.
Yeah.
There really is very little opportunity for servicing from the back at all, and in any event, my understanding is that from the manager of the shop that all servicing does currently take place from the front, and I suspect that is probably to do with the size of the vehicle that undertakes the servicing.
Yeah, and further, I don't know if we have the answer to this one. Do we know? We don't need the exact address. We know the approximate area that the noise complaints came from.
Again, if only from my conversation with the manager, it seems to be directly from at least one or more of the properties above. However, he makes the point that servicing in the early morning, which led to complaints, is something which doesn't take place at present. Right,
and are we to understand that was perhaps not say a one-off, but isolated incidents, perhaps due to driver shortages and COVID issues and so forth?
That's my understanding. It was a response to that, yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison. So I think we can now make a preliminary decision, colleagues. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. I think with sufficient information. Happy to proceed.
Thank you, Councillor Brown.
And happy to proceed as well.
Yes, as am I, colleagues. So we'll assess the case and move to debate. Having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, I will start things off, if I may. I'm always careful never to prejudge any of the papers that come before us until they've had a full discussion, but I'm pleased to say on this occasion I think that we will have a remedy which we can suggest that will please everyone. I think the point I would make is Pitlochry is self-evidently a very busy 7-day-a-week holiday town, and whilst I would have a degree of sympathy with people getting their evenings or their night times disturbed, I think if you live in somewhere like Pitlochry in the main road, you have to, I think, accept a degree of noise for delivery to all the shops, and also for perhaps the noise of holidaymakers enjoying themselves and so forth. I think you have to cut a little bit of slack here. I think it's not as if this is a quiet residential area getting disturbed by a lorry. So I think the key to this is to put forward a suggestion for condition 5 that would address the concerns of the residents and also allow this busy business to operate the 7 days a week. I think it's unreasonable to expect a baker dealing with a lot of fresh produce not to have deliveries. So I think, colleagues, as regards condition 5, my suggestion would be that the deliveries between, I think we'll just call it 7 in the morning and 7 at night to avoid any confusion, are perfectly acceptable Monday to Saturday. And I think given that Sunday morning is still considered a time for doing other things, we could suggest a time between 1 and 7 on a Sunday, and that way I don't think the peace is being disturbed, and I think also that this business, and indeed that there may be issues with other businesses, can continue to operate unimpeded. So that is my view, is that we adjust condition 5 as I suggest. Councillor Wilson, may we have your view?
Thanks, Convener. Well, this is downtown Pitlochry in the main street, the Harrogate of the North. If you look at the beautiful balustrades and everything that's there. It's also a baker's shop, and baker's shops need regular servicing. That's just a plain fact of life. If there have been complaints, I think I can understand that they might be complaints if folk came at 3 in the morning or even 5 in the morning. However, on the other side, if you rent or buy a flat above a parade of shops, you must expect a degree of noise, especially in a busy tourist town like Pitlochry. But we need to take a balanced view on the thing. I think we need to be helping the shop to a modest degree, and I think your suggestion in the number of hours, Convener, is appropriate and proportionate towards the demand, and also gives protection of amenity to the nearby residents after after 7 o'clock at night and before 7 o'clock in the morning, and also for those of us who wish to observe the Sabbath still, at least a wee bit of peace and quiet, or a long lie on a Sunday, I think is quite appropriate. So I'm supportive of tweaking the hours, and you, convener, correctly made the point that other businesses will be receiving deliveries, maybe not with the big lorries that will come to Greg's, but I think the other thing is they tend to have 1 or 2 deliveries a day at most. Now they might last for, I don't know, 10, 20 minutes or a wee bit longer, but once they've been and gone, that's it. So I'm supporting your proposal.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Braun, will we have your view?
Yes, thank you very much. I can't comment on Harrogate as I've never been there, unfortunately, but so I can't say anything about that. But I think you've summed up. Pitlochry is a 7-day town. It works 7 days a week. We're looking at a photograph of a parade of shops, and I think anybody who lives over a shop, whether they're renting or owning, must be prepared to accept that there will be noise from those shops, not necessarily within the public opening times, but contrary to that, there is an onerous task upon the shop themselves to accept that there are residential properties above them, and therefore a degree of compromise is necessary. And I think really, convener, you've summed it up. I think 7 AM to 7 PM Monday to Saturday is a fair time. It's a 12-hour window for deliveries to come and go, and I think on a Sunday 1 PM till 7 PM is also a good compromise. So I will concur with my colleagues that those are the opening times I think we should put in as condition 5, and I hope they will be acceptable to both the business of Greg's and to the residents who live above. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, colleagues. Well, once again, Mr. Elliott, we're all in agreement. I think this is a first. But I think if we can, I think you got the times that I was suggesting, Mr. Elliott. You happy with that?
Convener, if I could read out what I think the wording would be: servicing of and deliveries to the premises shall be carried out between 0700 and 1900 Monday to Saturday, and between 1300 to 1900, i.e. 1 till 7, on Sundays only.
Yeah, I'm perfectly content with that. I just checked with Councillor Wilson and Councillor Braun.
Yes, that's fine with me.
Yeah, that's fine.
Fine.
Well, thank you very much indeed, colleagues. Thank you once again to Councillors Wilson and Braun for volunteering to serve on the local review body. And that's the end of today's business, and we'll see you all in a month's time. Bye.